Hello viewers, welcome to this particular lecture on microbiology. In this particular lecture, which is on the development and history of immunology, I shall be covering the period between 1969 and 1983. Now, immunology being a developing science, gradually this subject is developing, new discoveries are being added, and which is actually very much important for the survivability of human beings, not only for detection of a particular disease, but also preventing a particular disease through specific antibody production. So to start with, it was Brunner in the year 1969 developed a unique technique. This technique is release of CR or chromium 51. It is actually named as chromium 51 release assay. In this particular technique, cells were labeled with chromium 51 and they wanted to detect that what is the amount of cell that is being lysed or affected by virus or say cancerous detection, and ultimately those cells which are lysed will release the chromium, and the amount of chromium, because it is radioactive, can easily be detected by autoradiography in a scintillation counter, and thereby we can say what is the quantum of the disease development. So what are the steps? Here there are three main steps. First of all, the T cells or the target cells are labeled with CR51 and then they are centrifuged, and the actual T cells will release the CR51, so it will remain in the supernatant and the pellet will contain the intact cell. This supernatant now is transferred to a microtiter plate, or it is a ELISA plate. It will be subjected to autoradiography or scintillation counter, and we can actually detect what is the level of CR51. So depending upon the level of CR51, we can say, okay, this amount of cells are affected.
Sir, is there a specific reason why we are using chromium in the chromium release assay?
Yeah, actually you can use other metals also. You can use barium, but the question is why chromium? Because of its low solubility. So toxicity will be less. Even if some chromium is there retained within the body, because they are not absorbed by other tissue, so there will be less toxicity. Okay, good. Now coming to the next important discovery, in 1971, it was Eva Engvall and Peter Perlman. They discovered a unique technique which is called enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay or ELISA. Now what is the principle? Say for example, there is a particular antigen and an antibody which is binding. Binding of this antigen with a specific antibody, if there is a particular substrate associated with that which can release some color, and when a specific enzyme is added, that color will be released. This is the principle. The quantum of the color or the quantity of the color will denote what is the level of infection. So if there is an unknown disease, by doing this particular test, we can say, okay, this person is suffering from this disease even if there is no external symptom. And this test became an ideal tool to detect the, say, HIV, to detect a hepatitis B or hepatitis C, but they are of different types. The most common one that is being used is direct ELISA. What is that? Now here what happened is, you are immobilizing the particular antibody to which the antigen is binding, and then the secondary antibody will actually bind with the other side of this particular protein or antigen, and it is having this particular colored substance, and that will develop the color. So here what will you detect? You will detect the presence of this antigen. So it is called direct ELISA. But indirect ELISA is a case where you are making the antigen or the protein immobilized. It is immobilized on a matrix, and these are all microtiter vessels, small plates, where you will first bind the primary antibody, and then with the primary antibody you will add the known specific enzyme linked secondary antibody and the color will be developing. So here what will you detect? You will detect the primary antibody which is unknown. So this is the principle between direct and indirect. But there are some other techniques as well in ELISA, like this one, which is called the competitive ELISA. Now in this competitive ELISA, the antibody or antigen, they are incubated and they are actually added to antigen coated wall. And naturally the specific antibodies will be binding with this particular antigen. The proteins will not be binding. And the antigens which are binding, now when it is added to the secondary antibody or secondary antibody is added to the mixture, they will bind and the color develops. So there is a definite color developing between the two types of antibody competing with each other. So it is called competitive ELISA. But this is a very unique, and this is called sandwich ELISA. Why it is called sandwich ELISA? Now in this case, it is quite similar to indirect ELISA, but the antibody, the primary antibody is immobilized below to the matrix as shown here, and then there is the antigen binding and the antibody or the known antibody or the enzyme linked antibody is added from the outside. And the moment the substrate is added, this particular color development occurs because the antigen is being sandwiched by the antibody on both ends. It is called sandwich ELISA. But actually ELISA is definitely a method by which a particular antigen or a particular antibody can easily be detected even if there is no symptom. So it is a very important tool, but even there is some limitation. Sometimes if the level of the antibody is too low, because the antigen volume is too low or the antigen titer is too low, then the disease cannot be detected. In that case, there will be some other techniques, like say for example the Western blot may be employed for detecting that particular antigen or protein. Okay. Now this is a gentleman, Ralph M. Steinman, who actually in the year 1973 discovered a unique type of cell which he named as dendritic cell. This is the actual photograph or the scanning electron microscopy of dendritic cell. Why they are so called? Because you can see they are having dendrite-like projection. It's a round cell with dendrite-like projection. You know dendrite, they are in the nerve cell. And this particular cell in the young stage, they appear as if they are having a veil. So young dendritic cells are also called veil cell. And this particular dendritic cell will have a specific receptor and their function is also different. Say for example, they are having a specific TLR, they are having specific T cell receptor, they are having the ability to bind with C-type lectin. But in one way, what do they do actually? They will bind with the antigen and they will take the antigen to some specific T cell. Or the other, they will mediate between the antigen and the T cell, and thereby the antigen can easily be recognized by the T cell. And sometimes they also have the power to take it inside the body, inside the cytosol, and there will be a lysosome attached and the lysosome will destroy it. So in one side, it is bringing the antibody close to the antigen, it is a mediator that way, and at the same time, it is also acting as a protective cell, killing that particular unknown antigen. Okay. So whenever they are acting as a mediator, they will have some other activity. What is that? Production of some defense related molecules like cytokine. So whenever the cytokines are being produced, naturally this co-stimulator effect increases and the hypersensitivity within the body increases, but with a specific purpose that the actual infection will come down. That is the definite target. And this particular dendritic cell also have a unique function where they are actually binding with some tumor antigen, and they will ultimately bring that tumor antigen, they will bind with the dendritic cell, and then this particular antigen will be destroyed by some cytotoxic T cell. So in one way, the number of tumor antigen coming to the dendritic cell and the cytotoxic T cell coming or prevailing on that particular antigen will destroy it. So in one way you can say to some extent it is also tumor destroying cell. So that way they are also important. Now this person, Neil Journey, in the year 1974, denoted a unique theory which he called immune network hypothesis. That is, whenever there is an antigen, they will actually have a unique networking or a bigger platform in which ultimately more antibodies will be activated. And this network actually is coming under immune network hypothesis. So here there is a specific recognizable set, say P1 or P2 or P3, binding with specific stimuli, and thereby this platform increases. And as this platform increases, naturally there will be more antigen antibody binding. And what you want it? You want it because you want to trap those antigen and bring it under the purview of the antibody. So by this immune network hypothesis, in one way, you are having a blanket sort of protection where the different types of antibodies will be ready to accept different antigen. You are getting a protection. So there is a very unique theory. You can understand this. Okay. And the more it is active, the more you are protected or secured. Now these two gentlemen in the year 1974, namely Rolf Zinckernel and Peter Doherty, they discovered a unique phenomenon where actually they showed that there is some MHC or major histocompatibility complex associated T cell or specific T cell binding of MHC. That means what? If there is a particular MHC, there will be this histocompatibility molecule which will have that particular peptide inside, will bind with the T cell receptor of the T cell, and this is a specific site, and this particular binding will be aided by the T cell surface glycoprotein, and thereby what happens is there will be close affinity between the MHC and the T cell. Now there are two types of selection. If this binding is too tight, very tight, then naturally the cells will be destroyed. And this is somewhat, these are called negative selection. But if the binding is very, very thin, or the binding is very, say for example, very weak, then they will be released and released to bind with specific clone. But at the same time, too less binding is also not good. So moderate binding is ideal to develop this particular APC and T cell binding. So in particular way, this type of binding of the MHC is also helping us to understand the mechanism of developing the MHC functioning, organ rejection, and also even autoimmunity. Okay. So this particular phenomenon is really a milestone in understanding which particular cell will be active whenever there is a particular foreign antigen coming into our body. Okay.
Sir, is the route in which the antigen is entering the body important in eliciting immune response?
Yeah, you can understand. In our younger days, we used to take some antigen, and this antigen intake is through skin. It is often given as a vaccine, but basically why in skin? Because it has got close proximity with the blood, so immediately the hypersensitivity will be more, even if the antigen level is too low. So naturally the cutaneous pathway is a very easy pathway. But think, you will take it through your mouth. If you take it through your mouth, it will come to the stomach, and if it is acid labile, it will be destroyed. So naturally it should be acid resistant, and at the same time it will tolerate low pH, and at the same time it should reach the blood through the intestine. So it takes time. So naturally all vaccines cannot actually take the oral pathway, but most of the vaccines are active when we take the cutaneous or blood pathway. So naturally pathway, as you have rightly pointed out, is a very important tool or a very important point that should be remembered when we administer a particular antigen. In the year 1975, it was Kohler and Milstein. They discovered a unique technique which is called hybridoma. And what was that? Actually, the myeloma cells or the tumorigenic cells is fused with the antibody forming cells of rat, and they actually developed rapidly the different antibodies which are monoclonal, active against a particular line of cells. So this technique of fusing the myeloma with the antibody producing cell is called hybridoma. And this hybridoma actually is a very important tool to develop monoclonal antibody against unknown viruses.
Sir, what are the myeloma cells?
Myeloma cells are the red bone marrow cells which are cancerous. So they replicate very fast, and whenever they are fused by polyethylene glycol with the antibody producing cell, you are generating antibody at a very fast rate. Okay? Now three different scientists, namely Rolf Kiesling, Eva Engvall and Hans Wigzell, they actually developed or they identified a unique group of cell which is the natural killer cell. These are the natural killer cell. And this natural killer cell actually is a particular cytotoxic T cell because they destroy a cell suitable for destroying an infected cell or destroying tumor. So that way they are giving some defense. And they are also called large granular lymphocyte or LGL. They have different function, and this function is, say, for example, production of cytokine, production of interferon, or they can activate different other dendritic cell, and thereby ultimately natural killer cell will perform in two different ways or three different ways. One is activating the defense elicitation or defense reaction, destroying some other infected cell through interleukins or cytokines, and at the same time they can also destroy tumor cells or reduce the development of cancer. So naturally, these natural killer cells are a very important tool to withstand or to prevent the development of infection. This person, Tonegawa, in the year 1976, he discovered a unique phenomenon where he showed that there are some specific areas within the antibody which are called VDJ segmentation, and these VDJ segmentation are actually present both in the light chain and the heavy chain, and the V for variable, D for diversity and J for joining. You can clearly see that out of this K or lambda or H subunit, more in the heavy chain. All the VDJ segments are more in the heavy chain and relatively less in the light chain. And in fact, the diversity is minimum in the light chain. So they are more conserved that way. But where they are present, this is the region where these VDJ segments are present in a particular arm of an antibody. And you can see how they can bring about modification. You can see these are the V and these are the D and J, and there is a fourth one which is the C. Normally they can remove, intermediate portions are removed. You can see here the intermediate segments are lost, unwanted D and J segment gone, or sometimes there may be intermingling between the D and J exon, maybe the transposition. Third one, there may be unwanted V or D segments gone, or there may be recombination between V and DJ exon. So ultimately what is there? Ultimately you are producing different clones of antibody, and as you make a different clone, this antibody will be targeted towards a specific antigen. Okay. In the year 1979, Kendall Smith discovered the typical monoclonal T cell for its anti-tumorigenic activity or rather it will track the tumor cell. It will basically help the activity of different anti-oncogenic or anti-cancer drug, and at the same time it will have a typical immunoconjugative action. This particular monoclonal T cells thereby will help in reducing the development of cancer. As you can see in this time-lapse video microscopy, the lysis of melanoma cells, this typical white line is actually tracking the pathway of the CD8 cell. In a period of 5.5 hours, you can see the number of cells or the number of cancer cells have reduced. So this specific activity of this monoclonal T cell, it is not only preventing the development of cancer but also causing cytolysis and reducing the actual cancer disease. The same person, Smith, also is accredited with the discoveries of interleukin. He worked with this particular molecule between the period of 1980 to 1983, and he discovered two major types of interleukin. And basically, why they are so called? Because they are produced by leukocytes, and they are basically the cytokines. These cytokines which will participate in eliciting the immune response. At the same time, it can actually bring about inflammatory reaction. But broadly, these interleukins are of two types, as I've said. Interleukin 1 may be having specific role like increase of natural killer cell, activating the polymorphonuclear leukocyte, increasing the permeability of endothelium so that the T cells can actually enter, cytocidal activity of the macrophage, or actually increase the helper T cell activity with respect to more cytokine production, T cell proliferation, bringing in humoral immunity, and at the same time may be involved in different types of cytokine release. And the interleukin 2 also have some specific role. They are secreted by lectin or antigen stimulated T cells, and they also help in the proliferation of specific T cells, production of cytokine, perforin mediated reaction where the cell will be destroyed through perforation, and at the same time it will also increase the level of apoptosis, particularly useful in destruction of cancer mediated cells or cancer related cells. So interleukins are very important molecule for the survivability of human against diseases or against cancer. These four people, they are Raynaud's, Marak, Kapler and Ellison. They are responsible in 1983 for the discovery of a unique receptor present in the T cell, and naturally they are called T cell receptor. And this T cell receptor are embedded on the membrane of the T cell. This is the phospholipid bilayer where they are embedded, and they are embedded with the help of this disulfide linkage at the base, and they are having the variable and the constant domain. The variable region may have alpha beta, and the constant domain will also have the alpha beta. And this particular T cell receptor actually is important for recognizing specific MHC. And whenever you call about alpha beta, they are present in almost in 95% cases, as it is shown here. But there is some 5% minor case where these chains will be delta and gamma. So they are very rare type T cell receptor. But definitely they are actually binding with the MHC, or rather helping in the mediation of this reaction as shown here. What is seen here, you can see this is the CD4 binding with the antigen presenting cell with the T cell receptor here. And it will have two types of fate. One will be the helper T cell will actually mature, and ultimately it will bind and it will be releasing the cytokines, or at the same time there will be the specific binding where this T cell has actually bound and it has gone inside. So there may be different types of reaction that is ultimately activating the different transcriptional factors responsible for defense reaction. I come to the almost the last major discovery in this particular lecture, which is in 1983. Two scientists, Montagnier and Gallo, they together discovered HIV. But ultimately Montagnier was awarded with the Nobel Prize for the discovery of HIV, and this is actually discovered from HTLV1 or human T lymphocyte virus. And this is the actual same study of the HIV-1 virus denoted by Montagnier. And this is the particular complete model of this virus, having an outer lipid coat with a specific glycoprotein GP120 and GP41, and ultimately this is called GP160 outside for binding. There is an inner capsid with two molecules of single-stranded RNA and two specific enzymes, namely integrase and the reverse transcriptase, producing the DNA or the sense DNA or the antisense DNA first from the plus RNA. And naturally, whenever the DNA is produced, now it will produce the cDNA, will produce the sense DNA, and it will get into the host cell. But why it is an important discovery? Because actually this particular virus will bring down the immunity reaction, and the person ultimately will die because of the loss of immunity. And this is a dreadful disease, a killer disease, though itself is not killing, but you are being killed because of some secondary infection, because you don't have any suitable reply to that.